She thought she had outsmarted her stepdaughter, trapping her in a life of misery by arranging her marriage to a poor man. But fate had a different plan, one that turned her scheme against her in the most unexpected way. What happens when a cruel plan backfires in the most dramatic way possible? The village was quiet as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues over the rooftops. In a modest home on the outskirts, a woman sat in her chamber, her lips curled into a wicked smile. This was no ordinary woman. She was a stepmother, and her heart harbored nothing but resentment for her husband's daughter. From the moment the girl had stepped into her life, she had been a thorn in her side. Kind, gentle, and beautiful, the girl's mere presence irritated her. The stepmother had always feared that the girl would one day inherit her father's wealth. That would mean less for her own children, something she could not allow. Every day, she schemed, looking for ways to push her stepdaughter into despair. But no matter how much she burdened her with endless chores or scolded her without reason, the girl endured in silence, her patience unwavering. One evening, as she sat deep in thought, an idea sparked in her mind. If she could not get rid of the girl by mistreatment alone, she would take a different approach. She would marry her off, but not to someone of high status. No, that would be too generous. Instead, she would ensure she ended up with a man who had nothing to offer. A poor, struggling man, incapable of providing a comfortable life. With her plans set in motion, the stepmother wasted no time. She spread word that her stepdaughter was ready for marriage, but she deliberately chose suitors who were struggling farmers, laborers, or debt-ridden merchants. She rejected any proposal from men of good standing, making excuses about how they were not a good match. Finally, she settled on a man who fit her cruel intentions perfectly, an orphan with no wealth, no land, and no family connections. The stepdaughter, ever obedient, did not protest when she was informed of her fate. Deep inside, she knew her stepmother did not have her best interests at heart, but she placed her trust in Allah. If this was her destiny, she would accept it with patience and dignity. The wedding was a simple affair, with no grand celebrations. The stepmother did not bother with elaborate decorations or feasts, as she had done for her own daughters. Instead, she made it clear that this marriage was nothing more than an obligation she was eager to fulfill. After the ceremony, the stepdaughter left her father's house, stepping into an uncertain future. Her husband welcomed her with kindness, apologizing for not being able to provide much. Though they had little, he assured her that he would work hard to take care of her. The stepmother, watching from a distance, smirked. She believed she had won. She imagined her stepdaughter suffering in poverty, struggling to make ends meet, and regretting ever having been born into a house where she was unwanted. She was certain that soon, the girl would be miserable, and her spirit would be crushed. But fate had other plans. Though the stepdaughter's new home was small and modest, it was filled with warmth and sincerity. Her husband, unlike the people she had lived with before, valued her presence and treated her with respect. She did not have to wake up to harsh words or endure endless criticism. Instead, she was met with encouragement, appreciation, and genuine care. Days turned into weeks, and while their struggles were real, they faced them together. The husband worked tirelessly, taking on whatever jobs he could find. The stepdaughter, too, contributed in every way possible, using her skills to sew garments and bake bread to sell in the marketplace. Their efforts, combined with their unwavering faith, slowly began to bear fruit. Meanwhile, back at her father's house, the stepmother continued to revel in what she thought was her victory. She would often speak of her stepdaughter in a condescending manner, mocking the life she imagined she was leading. She must be regretting her fate now, she would say, laughing with her daughters. Married to a man who has nothing. How unfortunate! However, she was unaware of the reality unfolding far from her sight. What she thought would be a life of suffering had instead become a story of resilience and success. The stepdaughter and her husband, through patience and perseverance, were slowly rising above their circumstances. One day, a traveler passing through the marketplace brought news that would shake the stepmother to her core. The poor man she had arranged for her stepdaughter to marry had not only overcome his hardships but had also built a thriving business. Through hard work, he had gained recognition, and now he was no longer the struggling orphan people once pitied. When the stepmother heard the news, she was stunned. How could this be? The girl she had tried to ruin was now in a better position than she had ever imagined. Jealousy burned within her, but she refused to believe it. Determined to see the truth for herself, she traveled to the village where her stepdaughter now lived. What she saw left her speechless. The once humble home was now larger, filled with the signs of prosperity. Her stepdaughter, dressed modestly yet elegantly, carried herself with dignity and grace. But the most painful sight for the stepmother was the look of contentment on her face, proof that her plan had not only failed but had completely backfired. Standing at the doorstep of the house she once mocked, the stepmother felt a sense of humiliation she had never known before. For years, she had believed that wealth and status determined one's worth. But here stood her stepdaughter, not only thriving but also far happier than she had ever been in the household she left behind. The stepmother clenched her fists, unable to accept that the girl she had tried to break had instead risen above her schemes. And for the first time in her life, she tasted the bitterness of her own cruelty. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The tables had turned, and soon, she would find herself in desperate need of the very person she had tried to destroy. The stepdaughter stood at the doorstep of her home, watching the sun rise over the distant hills. It had been months since she left her father's house, and life had been far from easy. Yet, despite the challenges, she felt something she had never known before: peace. Her husband, though poor in wealth, was rich in kindness. Unlike the cold and calculated treatment she had endured in her stepmother's house, here, she was valued. Every morning, he left for work with determination, and every evening, he returned with a smile, never once allowing hardship to dampen his spirit. The stepdaughter was not one to sit idly by. She knew the weight of their struggles and refused to let her husband bear them alone. With skilled hands, she took to sewing, creating garments that caught the attention of the villagers. Slowly, her small efforts turned into something more. People sought her out for her embroidery, willing to pay a fair price for her craft. At first, the earnings were meager, but neither she nor her husband complained. They understood that success was not built overnight. They continued working with patience, putting their trust in Allah. What little they earned, they spent wisely, ensuring their home was sustained and their needs were met. One day, an opportunity presented itself. A wealthy merchant's wife, passing through the village, noticed the stepdaughter's work. She was impressed by the intricate patterns and delicate stitching. Seeing potential, she placed a large order, promising more if the quality remained exceptional. It was a turning point. With the earnings from the order, the couple invested in better materials. The stepdaughter worked tirelessly, perfecting her craft, while her husband supported her in every way he could. Word spread quickly, and soon, more orders followed. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. Their once humble home expanded. What was once a daily struggle for food turned into a life of stability. The stepdaughter no longer worried about where the next meal would come from, nor did she fear the uncertainty of the future. Meanwhile, her husband, inspired by their progress, sought to improve their circumstances further. He had always been hard-working, but now he had a reason to dream bigger. With their combined savings, he started a small business, purchasing and reselling goods at the local market. His honesty and dedication earned him the trust of many, and within a few years, his reputation as a reliable tradesman grew. Their journey was not without trials. There were moments of difficulty, times when they faced setbacks and obstacles that threatened their progress. But unlike before, they had something stronger than wealth: faith, perseverance, and an unbreakable bond. Back in the stepmother's household, the news of their success had begun to spread. At first, she dismissed it as mere rumors. How could the same girl she had cast away now be living comfortably? It was impossible, she told herself. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder. Her daughters, once smug and confident, began to feel uneasy. They had laughed when their stepsister was married off to a man with nothing, believing they had secured their own future. Yet, while they remained in the same place, she had moved ahead. One evening, a merchant who had dealings with the stepdaughter's husband visited the village. He spoke of their growing business, of the wealth they had accumulated through sheer effort. He described how the stepdaughter, once abandoned to a fate of hardship, was now respected and admired. The stepmother's face darkened with disbelief. Rage bubbled within her, but beneath it lay something deeper: fear. She had done everything in her power to ensure her stepdaughter would fail, yet here she was, thriving. Unable to contain her curiosity, she decided to see for herself. She traveled to the village, expecting to find a trace of the girl's former struggles. But what she saw shattered her illusions. The small, broken-down house where her stepdaughter had once lived was no more. In its place stood a home that was far grander than she had imagined. The marketplace, where her stepdaughter had once walked in simple clothes, now welcomed her as a respected businesswoman. The stepmother's heart pounded. This was not how things were supposed to unfold. She had orchestrated everything to ensure the girl's downfall, yet the very fate she had feared had come to pass. Her stepdaughter had risen above her schemes. As she stood in the marketplace, she caught sight of her stepdaughter. Dressed with dignity, her face radiated contentment. She carried herself with quiet confidence, no longer the timid girl who once endured endless mistreatment. For the first time, the stepmother felt the sting of regret. She had believed that wealth and status determined worth, but here was proof that character, patience, and perseverance mattered far more. The stepmother clenched her fists, refusing to accept what she saw. But deep inside, she knew, her plan had failed. Instead of breaking her stepdaughter's spirit, she had unknowingly set her on a path that led to success. And the worst part? This was only the beginning. The stepmother stood frozen in the middle of the bustling marketplace, her mind racing with disbelief. The very girl she had cast away, hoping to see her struggle, was now admired by many. Everywhere she looked, people spoke of the stepdaughter and her husband with respect. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Determined to prove the rumors false, she decided to confront the truth herself. With forced confidence, she made her way to the grand home that now belonged to her stepdaughter. The structure, though not extravagant, was built with care and reflected stability. Every brick, every detail spoke of progress, an undeniable testament to the stepdaughter's success. The moment she knocked on the door, a servant greeted her with a polite smile. A servant? The stepmother's breath hitched. She never imagined the girl would have the means to afford household help. As she stepped inside, she found herself in a space filled with warmth. The scent of fresh bread lingered in the air, and the walls bore signs of a loving home. Then, the stepdaughter appeared. She was no longer the timid girl who once endured mistreatment in silence. Her presence carried quiet strength, and her eyes, once filled with sorrow, now shone with confidence. Dressed in modest yet elegant attire, she radiated dignity. For a moment, the stepmother struggled to find her voice. She had rehearsed what she would say, but standing before the stepdaughter, all her words crumbled. You've done well for yourself," she finally muttered, forcing a tight-lipped smile. The stepdaughter met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "Alhamdulillah, everything is from Allah's mercy," she replied calmly. The stepmother's stomach twisted at the humility in her voice. She had expected arrogance, a hint of superiority, but there was none. Instead, there was composure, a sign that the stepdaughter no longer harbored resentment. The silence between them grew heavy until the stepmother cleared her throat. "I heard about your business," she continued, glancing around. "It seems fortune has been kind to you." The stepdaughter nodded. "It was not fortune alone. My husband and I worked hard, and Allah blessed our efforts. Struggles came, but patience brought ease." The stepmother flinched at the words. She had never believed in patience. She had sought shortcuts, manipulations, and deceit to secure her own daughter's futures. Yet, here was proof that hard work and sincerity bore greater rewards. As much as she hated to admit it, she needed help. The wealth she once relied on had dwindled. Her daughters, spoiled by luxury, had not learned to stand on their own. One by one, the proposals for their marriages had fallen through. Men who once sought their hands in marriage now turned away, preferring women with better prospects. The very security she had tried to ensure for them was slipping through her fingers. The thought of asking for assistance from the stepdaughter she had mistreated was humiliating, but desperation left her with little choice. Taking a deep breath, she lowered her gaze and spoke hesitantly. "Your sisters, they are struggling. Times have changed, and things are not as they once were." She swallowed her pride and added, "I was wondering if you could offer some help." The request hung in the air like an unspoken plea. The stepdaughter studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. The stepmother expected a triumphant smile, a moment of vengeance where her stepdaughter would remind her of every cruelty she had inflicted. But instead, the stepdaughter remained composed. "Help is given where it is needed," she said finally. But sincerity matters. Do you truly seek help, or do you only seek convenience? The words struck deep. The stepmother knew the answer. She had not come with genuine remorse. She had come out of necessity. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her actions. She had once been the one in control, dictating the stepdaughter's fate without a second thought. Yet, fate had shifted, placing the power in the hands of the very girl she had sought to ruin. Realizing she had nothing left but honesty, she sighed. "Perhaps I have wronged you more than I care to admit," she confessed. "But I am not asking for myself. My daughters, they are innocent in all of this. If you can find it in your heart to help them, I will not forget your kindness." The stepdaughter remained silent for a long moment. Then, with a nod, she replied, "I will do what is right, not out of revenge or obligation, but because it is what pleases Allah." The stepmother felt her chest tighten. She had expected rejection, yet she was being offered something she had never given: mercy. As she left the house, her thoughts were heavier than ever. She had believed herself to be the one in control, but life had proven otherwise. The very girl she had discarded had risen far above her, not just in wealth, but in character. The twist of fate was undeniable. The tables had turned. And for the first time, the stepmother understood the true meaning of loss, not the loss of wealth, but the loss of dignity, respect, and the chance to undo past mistakes. The stepmother walked away from the grand home, her mind clouded with thoughts she could no longer suppress. The reality of her situation was clear. She was no longer the one in control. The very girl she had discarded, believing she would suffer, had risen beyond her schemes. The wealth and comfort she had once taken for granted were now slipping from her grasp, while the stepdaughter she had wronged stood in a position of strength. Days turned into weeks, and the stepmother's troubles only grew heavier. Her daughters, once admired for their status, now found themselves struggling to find suitable suitors. The wealth that once made them desirable was dwindling, and with it, the opportunities she had always expected. Merchants and noblemen who once spoke highly of her family now turned away, uninterested in forging connections with a household on the decline. Meanwhile, in the very village where she had sent her stepdaughter to suffer, success flourished. The business the stepdaughter and her husband had built continued to grow, their influence extending beyond the small town. Traders from different regions sought their goods, recognizing the quality and craftsmanship that had become their signature. Their home, once a modest dwelling, had expanded, not in extravagance, but in a way that reflected their hard work and prosperity. Despite all this, the stepdaughter remained humble. She had every reason to gloat, every right to turn her back on the woman who had treated her with cruelty, yet she did not. She welcomed her stepmother into her home when she came asking for help, listened without malice, and responded with wisdom rather than spite. But while the stepdaughter had shown mercy, the village had not forgotten. People whispered about the stepmother's past cruelty, about how she had cast away the very person who now stood as a beacon of success. When she walked through the streets, she felt their stares, heard their hushed conversations. She thought she was sending her to ruin, an old woman murmured to a vendor. And now look at her, begging from the very girl she tried to destroy. The words stung. The stepmother had spent years believing she was superior, controlling the fate of others, making decisions that only benefited herself. Now, she was at the mercy of the one person she had least expected to need. One evening, as the stepmother sat in her home, staring at the dimly lit room that once gleamed with luxury, she felt an unfamiliar weight settle over her heart. It was not just regret, it was the realization that she had been wrong. Her stepdaughter had not succeeded through trickery, nor had she taken shortcuts. She had endured hardship with patience, built her life through honest labor, and gained respect not through fear, but through kindness. The stepmother had spent her life manipulating circumstances for her own benefit, believing that power and wealth were the only things that mattered. But now she understood the truth. True success was not measured by riches alone, but by character, by sincerity, and by the ability to rise above cruelty without becoming cruel in return. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found her stepdaughter standing there, carrying a small bundle of food. "I heard things have been difficult for you," the stepdaughter said gently. "I wanted to make sure you had enough." The stepmother looked at the offering, shame burning in her chest. She had never once considered the girl's needs when she was under her roof, never once extended kindness when she was suffering. And yet, here she was, offering help without hesitation. For the first time in her life, the stepmother felt tears sting her eyes. She had spent so many years justifying her actions, convincing herself that she had done nothing wrong. But standing before the stepdaughter now, she could no longer deny the truth. "You are a better person than I ever was," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The stepdaughter smiled, not with pride, but with understanding. "People make mistakes," she replied. "But what matters is what they do once they realize them." The stepmother looked down, unable to hold her gaze. The weight of her own choices pressed upon her, heavier than it had ever been. That night, she sat in silence, reflecting on all she had lost, not just wealth, but the chance to have been a mother to a girl who had deserved love instead of cruelty. Fate had indeed turned the tables, but not in the way she had expected. She had once believed that she was the one with power, that she could shape the future to her will. But in the end, it was the very person she had tried to break who had taught her the greatest lesson of all. What goes around comes around. And sometimes, the greatest defeat is not losing riches or status, but realizing too late that the wealth of the heart is what truly matters. In the end, it wasn't wealth or status that determined success, it was patience, faith, and hard work. The stepmother's evil plan not only failed but also led to her own downfall, proving that what goes around truly comes around.